The current classification system also includes 6 kingdoms. The first kingdom on this slide is eubacteria, and these are the true bacteria that we're familiar with, things like E. coli and the bacteria that causes strep throat and other things. These are, of course, as we mentioned before, prokaryotes. They're unicellular, being only made of one cell. They have a cell wall that is made of a component called peptidoglycan. And these are very diverse and abundant organisms. They're found in every single habitat on Earth. The second kingdom is archaebacteria, and these are the archaea that we spoke of previously. They are also prokaryotes and unicellular, and they diverged from bacteria some time ago, but interestingly are more closely related to eukaryotic organisms. What makes them so different from the typical bacteria is that their cell wall does not contain that compound called peptidoglycan. The third kingdom is Protista, and these are simple eukaryotes. Remember that eukaryotes are cells that possess a nucleus. Now, the kingdom Protista is somewhat interesting because it includes a wide variety of different organisms. A protist could be either unicellular or multicellular, meaning they're made up of several cells in one organism. They're basically just considered to be kind of a mix of many different organisms that haven't found a proper kingdom yet. In fact, some scientists in the future are debating whether or not to split the kingdom Protista into several different kingdoms. So we are here learning about 6 kingdoms. Likely the next generation of biology students may learn about 10 different kingdoms because of the split of the protists. The fourth kingdom we're learning about here is fungi. Now there are very few examples of marine fungi, so we won't ever really talk much about them. But fungi, like mushrooms and yeast, are eukaryotes. And of course, like yeast, they can be unicellular, or like the mushroom, they can be multicellular. Now, they have cell walls like bacteria do, but their cell wall contains the component chitin, which is more flexible. And fungi, of course, are heterotrophic decomposers. This is why you would find mushrooms growing on trees that are decomposing in the forest. The fifth kingdom listed here is the plant kingdom, Kingdom Plantae. Plants, of course, are eukaryotes. They are multicellular, and of course, they have cell walls, as you may remember from biology. But the component that their cell walls are made of is cellulose, which is actually the fiber that we take in when we are consuming vegetables and stuff in our diet. All plants are autotrophic in the fact that they are photosynthesizers. So they use sunlight to convert carbon dioxide into carbohydrates. The sixth kingdom here is, of course, our kingdom, Kingdom Animalia. We, of course, are eukaryotes. Our cells have a nucleus. We are made up of more than one cell, so that means we are multicellular. Now, our cells do not have cell walls, and because we're heterotrophic consumers, or that we eat food, that, of course, also puts us in the animal kingdom. This slide shows a diagram that compares the 3-domain system to the 6-kingdom system. Notice that the domain bacteria includes the kingdom eubacteria. So there's really only one kingdom in that domain. The same can be said for the domain archaea, because that only includes the kingdom archaebacteria. Now the domain eukarya is much different. In the domain eukarya, there are actually 4 different kingdoms: Protista, Plantae, Fungi, and Animalia. Now, one question that may come to mind is, how is it that scientists decide what group to put organisms in? So how is it that scientists indeed classify organisms? Well, there are a couple of different methods in which organisms can be placed into these taxonomical groups. One method is to use the organism's morphology and anatomical structure. The diagram on the left shows the 4-limb structure of a human, cat, whale, and bat. You'll notice that in each forelimb there are the same bones. You have the humerus, which is colored in tan. You have a radius and ulna, which is colored orange, and I guess that's like a light tan. And then you have the carpals and metacarpals, which make up the hand, paw, flipper, or wing as it is in the bat. Based on the shape and structure of those bones, we can see how it's easy to put these animals into different groups based on that structure. The other method used by scientists to classify organisms is to use the biochemistry of the organism. In other words, to take a close look at its RNA. And if you recall from a previous slide, this is exactly how Dr. Woese was able to put archaebacteria into a different domain, because he looked at the ribosomal RNA structure of those organisms. But scientists can also use DNA sequences as well as protein sequences. If you recall that proteins are made of amino acids, and of course different amino acids correspond to the DNA sequence. So proteins can also be used to classify organisms. In the diagram on the right, you can see this is looking at a couple of genes, not a couple of genes, one gene from a few different organisms such as Homo sapiens. That would be the human. And you notice gorilla is mentioned there. Guess what? That's the gorilla. You can actually compare the gene, a globin gene from those organisms, and see that they are genetically different, which makes sense because they're different species. Phylogeny is known as the evolutionary history of an organism, and it is something that taxonomists use quite often. Phylogenetics is the study of these evolutionary relationships among organisms, and is usually based on molecular sequencing data as well as morphological data, as we talked about in the previous slide. The diagram that is used by in phylogenetics is called the phylogenetic tree. This is a diagram showing the evolutionary relationships among various biological species, and is very much like a family tree in reverse. So if we were to imagine humans and chimpanzees in the phylogenetic tree, you'd imagine that we would be pretty close, both being primates. We'd be a lot closer to a chimpanzee in that tree than, say, a bacteria or a sponge or a piece of coral or a tree, because those things are in different classes, so we would be far away from them in the tree of life for the phylogenetic. This slide shows a very broad and general phylogenetic tree. You'll notice that, in fact, this one is called the tree of life because it's showing the three domains of life. So you can see on the branch on the left is the bacteria domain. And if you notice, the branch leading to bacteria is the first one to branch off from the stem, showing that bacteria were likely the first types of organisms to appear on the planet. So if you look at the different types of bacteria that are listed there, you've got your gram-positive bacteria. You also have your cyanobacteria, which are the ones that can do photosynthesis. Now the next branch over leads to the archaea, and these are the archaebacteria that we learned about. There's some interesting bacteria. You'll notice some are for example, the Methanococcus and Methanobacterium and Halobacterium. It's interesting. These are all referring to organisms that live in a very extreme habitats. These are prokaryotes that can live in methane, areas of very high concentrated methane. Halobacterium is bacteria that can live in very salty water. These are archaeans are generally ones that are found in very, very extreme habitats. Now the last branch, the one that goes all the way up to the top, of course, goes to the eukarya. And this includes the plants and fungi as well as some of the other